Hello, welcome to another Album of Record podcast. I'm Craig, joined as always by Andrew. By the time you are seeing this, hearing this, I will have already seen MJ Lenderman, which is tonight. Very excited for that. In a minute, we're going to get to the This Week in Turnstile with Andrew. And then the whole point of this episode is the 25th anniversary of Deftones' White Pony. As always, you can find everything that we do at albumofrecord.com. I finally got off my butt and got back to posting things there. But that's the best place to know when something new comes out, usually, when I'm not feeling lazy. How's it going, Andrew?
Nobody wants to hear about my problems, so I'll just say it's going good, Craig. Plus, I know we're short on time. So how are you, Craig?
I'm doing fine. I'm much better when I'm talking about music. This is my chance to turn everything off. But I'm excited for This Week in Turnstile.
Me too. So we'll see if I can make this a recurring segment until the new Turnstile album comes out. I feel like there's a decent chance there's going to be something new coming out every week. Until then, we've only got like three weeks, I think, 3 or 4 weeks until it comes out. So we're getting closer. But anyways, I did want to talk about this last Saturday. Depending on when you're listening to this, maybe it was 2 Saturdays ago by now, but Turnstile played a free show in Baltimore at a park, and I really should have written down the name of the park, but I'm not super familiar with Baltimore, so I don't remember the name of the park. But anyways, if you go to Turnstile's YouTube page, like their official YouTube page, they have the whole thing is recorded, and there's a couple things I want to say about this show. First of all, the sheer amount of people that showed up for this show is mind-blowing. It is a sea of people. It wraps all the way around the side of the stage. There is just people everywhere who showed out for this Turnstile show, which, first of all, was just amazing to see. I mean, this, again, I talk about this all the time with this band, but this is a hardcore band that is generating a following unlike anything I've ever seen in hardcore. Like, you know, I mean, I think probably arguably you would say like the biggest hardcore band of all time is Black Flag. And I don't think Black Flag ever could have played a show for this many people. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. But it's just hard for me to imagine that many people showing up for a Black Flag show. So that's amazing. But the other thing that was really cool to me was they shot this not from, like, I think a lot of bands would have said, hey, let's get our camera guy in the front row and multiple camera angles and showing
set
the
up
band.
A giant scaffold in the middle of the crowd so that we can get the perfect shot from the soundboard view. Yeah.
This is shot from behind the stage where the crew are, or kind of the backside on like the backside. And what's cool about that is, so it's looking out onto the stage, but really you can tell like the focus of this thing is to show the crowd. Like the crowd is the star of this video, not Turnstile, which was just amazing to watch the reaction of the crowd and how into this show this crowd was. You know, they opened the show with Never Enough, the first time they ever played it live. And my favorite thing is, even in the little synth intro part, the crowd is already moshing and stage diving. Like they wasted no time getting into form. So any thought
and when you say stage diving, there's acrobatics, there's head walking, there's all
it's all of it.
The hardcore things that you wouldn't expect in a big free show in a public park with for charity.
Yeah, that's a good. I'm glad you mentioned that too. That's a good thing to mention. Is that
healthcare for the homeless?
It was a free show, and they were giving free water to the crowd. And the only thing they asked in return was a donation to a charity in Baltimore that provides healthcare for the homeless, which is a pretty just all around an awesome event. You know, I think sometimes you get this sense that like, oh, you know, Turnstile's not a hardcore band anymore, or like they've become too big for it. And like, it was just cool to see them still like representing the culture, the whole spirit of what hardcore is. And if you watch this video, like even after the show, they they keep showing. There's some really great footage after the show of them just going around, walking around the park, and talking to different fans, and you just see the communal spirit of what this is. Like, hardcore has always been sort of this like close knit scene, and it's always kind of been like, you know, a community, really, and that's what it is. You're supposed to look out for each other, and you just kind of really got the sense of all of that communal spirit and everything that goes into it. But the thing that struck me maybe the most was, I remember in 1992, when Pearl Jam was just blowing up, and they decided to do a free show at a park. It's known to Pearl Jam fans as Drop in the Park. It was a bootleg that was really popular. There was a bootleg video of it, and Pearl Jam did officially release, as part of the 10 Redux box set, one of the vinyl things in there is actually the Drop in the Park show, which is pretty cool. But like, it looks so similar to that, and like, you just get a sense of like, do I think Turnstile is going to get as big as Pearl Jam was? No, I don't. But you really get the sense of scale of where Turnstile is and just how big they really have become. And it, like, even Brendan, the lead singer of Turnstile, I'm sure this was not intentional. This is just kind of how he dresses, but he's wearing a flannel shirt at this show. And like, he's got the moppy, like, kind of Ed hair a little bit. Not as long as Ed had it back in those days, but when Ed's done like kind of the mop hair, like, he's kind of got that going. Like, it looked like Eddie Vedder. Like, he commands the stage very similarly to the way Ed used to command the stage in those, when Pearl Jam was younger in those days. And it was just, I just really highly recommend everybody, if you have even a passing interest in Turnstile, just check out a little bit of this video. And if you want, you can check out, there's tons of fan shot videos out there too, if you want different perspectives of everything. But just an unbelievable scene for that band. And this is just such an exciting time. I'm just cannot wait for this album to come out and see where it takes them.
Yeah, you don't often get to swoop in and watch a band in the beginning, at the peak of their powers, when you know that they're about to crest, maybe.
Yes.
And if this is the crest of the wave and it's all downhill from here, or this is the peak and it lasts a little while and they never get past this, like, good on them, man. They owe nobody anything. This is what winning looks like. And that's what I felt like when I was watching the video, is that this is victory. This is victory for this band. This is victory for their fans. And no matter what happens from this point forward, it's all good. You know, this is achievement.
Yeah, it was such a celebration, just celebration of the city, great. Of the band, like I said, the community, the scene, all of it. It was just really incredible, and it like had me kind of thinking, like, I don't think they will probably do this, just because like Turnstile likes to tour with bands that aren't necessarily hardcore bands. Like, they like to put themselves out there and, you know, bring on all these different sounds and, you know, just different types of bands. But I was like, man, wouldn't it be awesome if like you could get like just once a nationwide like Turnstile, Scowl, Drain lineup, maybe throw Military Gun in there if you want. Trying to think who else would
well, and that's a good point though.
Let's get Knocked Loose on this, like just a pure like monsters of modern hardcore show would be unreal.
Well, this will be interesting to see what kind of venues, what size venues they play on their subsequent tour for this record. Will they achieve Sleep Token level, where now they can play basketball arenas as the headliner? Is it going to be large theaters? The last time they came through Cleveland, they played the Agora, which I think is a 2,000 or 2,500 cap room. Mm-hmm. Maybe even a little bit smaller than that. I'm not positive, but have they made another jump? We're about to find out.
I would be curious to see, like, if they played Kemba live here in Columbus. That's our like indoor outdoor venue. I'd be really curious to see, like, if they did an outdoor show at Kemba, like, could they pack it? at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it would probably depend on price point and, like I said, openers and things like that. But it would be really interesting to see. They have played Kemba before, but I don't think they were the head. I'm trying to remember who the headliner was on that, but I don't think they were the headliner.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just really cool to see. It's just such an exciting time for me to just watch this band continue their meteoric rise. And like, I'm going to toot my own horn here a little bit, like, because I'm somebody, I can't say I was not in from the very, very beginning. Like, I was not aware of them when they put out Step to Rhythm. I became aware of them sometime after Nonstop Feeling came out, and I really liked that album a lot. I mean, I love that album, but then they did Time and Space, and it was like, okay, like, that was when they jumped to Roadrunner. They signed with Roadrunner and put out Time and Space, and that was like the first, like, okay, this band might be a little bit different than your traditional hardcore. But I mean, I just remember, like, before Glow On came out, just talking about how I thought this band there might be something happening, that this band was going to reach I didn't know what it would look like, but I was like, this band feels like they're bursting out of that little 400, 500 club show size hardcore scene. I was like, I think they're going to explode out of that. But it really feels now like they're on the verge of, like, just a level that we've never seen a hardcore band hit before. And I'll tell you, like, they played all three of the songs that have come out so far. Never Enough, Seeing Stars, and Birds. All three of those songs just crushed it live. Like, and again, that's what's cool about this band, is like, this band, because they're so welcoming and open to all these different sounds and styles, they can play a song like Seeing Stars. And they had to tell, at that point, they had asked everybody to stop stage diving because they were having issues. The stage kind of was breaking down and one of the speakers had collapsed, I guess. So they had asked people not to stage dive. But so they play Seeing Stars, and, like, just watching the audience just groove to this song and dance to this song that's not a traditional hardcore song, but nobody cares. Like, if you're in on Turnstile, like, you're there for all of it. And it's so cool to see.
So, and there are kind of parallels maybe with the album we want to talk about today, White Pony by
segue.
Deftones. There's a chance that Never Enough is very White Pony-esque, where Deftones kind of explode with Around the Fur in 1997. They tour extensively like crazy. They achieve levels of success and fame and radio success that they probably never dreamed that they would get after an album like Adrenaline. And their follow-up is White Pony, comes out in the year 2000. Obviously, we're a little bit early on the 25-year anniversary because it's in June. I think it came out June 20th.
June 20th, yeah.
But Deftones is a band that luckily enough, I was in from the very beginning. I was in on Adrenaline. Around the Fur came out while I was a freshman in college, and I just absolutely, if I wasn't already in love with the band after Adrenaline, I was totally in love with them after Around the Fur. And so I was looking forward to this record more than anything ever. And so I'm going to start.
Can I jump in real quick? I just want to say, like, going back to your point, I was also in on them from Adrenaline. I still remember being in my car driving. I can't remember where I was driving, but I remember the radio station played 7 Words. It was the first Deftones song I'd ever heard. And hearing that song was just one of those moments that you're like, wait, people make music like this? Like, it was so different, and it was exciting and energetic and a little scary, in ways. It was like, listen to him just scream "suck" over and over and over again. And, it was just like, what is this? Like, it was so different and special. And I immediately went out and got Adrenaline after hearing that. And this has been one of my top 10 favorite bands ever since then.
I think the first one I ever heard was 7 Words as well, but I think it was on 120 Minutes. And so it was the video.
Okay.
And just hearing that song with seeing this band of crazy looking, just crazy looking dudes. I was like, I need this band in my life. And I
Yeah.
bought that record and I was just all the way in. Um, so fast forward to June 2000. I was in college, but it was summertime. I was visiting my parents at home, and I picked up this record at like an Ames, which was the Western New York version of Kmart or something,
Mm-hmm.
at a roadside off an exit, so that I could listen to it on my 10-hour drive back to Boston from the Midwest. And I must have listened to this record 4 or 5 times in a row, just driving across, through Albany and Syracuse, and then Albany and Rochester. I messed up the order, but all those upstate New York cities that people just forget about. And yeah, White Pony was my soundtrack the whole way along.
I did you guys have On Cue? Was that a thing up in
No.
Northeast Ohio? So it was like a chain record store, CD store that would be in usually, I think they were usually in more rural areas. But that's where I would go to get most of my CDs when they came out in the town I grew up in. And I remember I was home from college that summer, and it would be the last summer I spent in my hometown. And I remember when this came out, On Cue had a thing that they were going to do a midnight release, but you had to pre-order if you wanted one of the color variations. So we knew there was going to be a gray one, a black one, and a red one on release day. And we'll get into what that meant. But I remember, like, I so desperately wanted the black one. So I did the pre-order, and that was a record, a CD. I remember going to the store at midnight to get my black copy of White Pony. And they just, that thing, that it was one of those things. That summer also Binaural came out by Pearl Jam, and I just remember endlessly switching between those two CDs. Like that entire summer, like these were the two albums I listened to more than probably anything. A part of me is thinking that maybe, or no, Fragile was 99, right?
Yeah.
Nine Inch Nails. So that wasn't in, I'm trying to remember if there was something else that was in the rotation, but I think it was just those two albums.
So I remember listening to it for the first time, and I don't think I even knew that there was a song by Maynard James Keenan with vocals from Maynard on that record until it started playing. These were the dark days where I feel like we know everything that we could possibly know about the Turnstile record, and they're purposely holding things back. You didn't have to purposely hold anything back in the year 2000, because not every band was using the internet. Not every label was using the internet, really. And so there was still a sense of discovery when you pulled the plastic off a CD and you popped it in and you listened to it for the first time. And I was doing my homework on this one, because not only is Maynard on this record, I never knew or had forgotten that Weiland sang on one of these.
It's funny that you said that. I did, until doing research for this episode, I had no idea he was on RX Queen.
Yeah, Weiland has some harmonies on RX Queen. He apparently went into a studio with Chino to work out to play around with some harmonies, and somehow or another uncredited, and they never even talked about paying him for anything. His harmonies ended up on the record.
It's truly amazing. Like that neither of us had any idea. As much as we consume everything we can get our eyes on when it comes to the bands we love, we try to just, if there's information, if there's an interview, an article, like we want to, read it, watch it, whatever. And that neither of us knew that Weiland was on this record is actually kind of cool.
So the other thing that was funny to me, just to kind of set the time and place, do you know what album beat White Pony in the first week of the Billboard charts?
Well, I know it debuted at number 3 on Billboard, and it was, but I don't know which one came out like that week. but it was Britney Spears and NSYNC were
Oops, I
1 and
did
2.
it again.
Yeah.
Oops, I did it again by Britney Spears. You know, this was the probably the peak of TRL and Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears and NSYNC and Backstreet and all those bands. You know, with the screaming crowd on Times Square looking into the MTV studios. And maybe Carson Daly was still there.
Oh, I'm sure he was. And then you had Korn, Limp Bizkit, and Deftones. Because we'll get into it, but Deftones definitely had a huge TRL presence from this album. But we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, so let's start right there. Is Change in the House of Flies, is that their biggest hit? Is that the
without
one?
a doubt? Without a doubt.
Okay.
It highest charting song they've ever had. Just without a doubt, it's their biggest hit.
Yeah, see, I didn't know if it was going to be that one or Be Quiet and Drive. But no, you're right. It even on Spotify to this day, it's still Change.
Hexagram also was a pretty big single, the first one from the self-titled follow-up album to this.
Yeah.
But none of them got anywhere near the. And again, I keep kind of jumping ahead, but maybe we should just talk about Back to School. I don't know, but Back to School, which was intentionally made just to try to be a hit as a favor, well, not a favor, as a demand of the record label, only hit, I think, number 29 on the charts.
Yeah, well, let's go straight to Back to School then, because Back to School Mini Maggot was not on the original record. And some point after the record was released, the label was pushing back and saying, "Hey, there's not another single on here. We'd like you to rework Pink Maggot."
They didn't even tell them to do that. They didn't even get that specific. They just said,
okay,
"Can you guys record another single for this?" And at that point, Chino was kind of pissed, and he's just like, "You know what? This is dumb." So he just took the chorus of Pink Maggot, reworked it into a super catchy new metal rap rock, butt rock type song, and was like, "Fine, here, you guys have this." And then the record label reissued the album like less than a year after the one came out, and they threw this on as Back to School as the first track on it, which is just infuriating, and it pissed off the band too.
But I bought it.
Did you buy it?
I did.
I've always been very, very firmly anti Back
Mini
to
Maggot.
School. Like it to me.
I'm not, and I think it's crazy. I think it's wrong. You know, I understand why the band feels that way, but I always hate when a band turns on a song that ends up out there that people could have and maybe fell in love with, and I'm. It's interesting to read the perspective, you know, because there's some quotes in the Wikipedia about this one where Chino said, "They said we lost our heaviness and there were no more singles on the album. First, I wanted to stick this idea up my ass, but then I thought I'm going to show these fuckers how easy it is to create a hit single, and so I rapped a hip hop part on that song. We shortened it, and half an hour later, the hit single was ready to roll on." And like, cool. But don't trash the material, because I think it's a great song to this day, and I'll stand by it. And I understand all the stuff around it,
but not.
I still think it's great, and I think the original version of Pink Maggot is also great.
But that's my point. Is I don't. And I guess you're countering my argument. My argument has always been, I did not know any of this backstory to why they did this and how they did it prior to.
I didn't either. I got my feelings hurt this last couple of weeks while I was researching this.
But what was funny about it was, like, I have always had this feeling that I was like, I don't understand who this song was for. Because to me, if you were a Deftones fan, you already had Pink Maggot, which was incredible. Like, one of my favorite songs on the album, the perfect album closer for this, and that they pulled out like this chorus and just turned it into this like what I feel is just a cheesy, generic rap rock song that was clearly like they put it out for TRL. It didn't chart well, but on TRL, that video was huge. And it was like, to me, it always felt like that was the audience it was for. Those are the people who like, and I guess I'm gatekeeping here a little bit, but it was like, as a Deftones fan, like, it just never made any sense to me. And then for that to be the first song on the album, it ruined the flow of that album for me. Like it doesn't make any sense as an opening track on it. And again, you get to the better version of it at the end anyways. Like,
well, see, I don't even completely disagree with what you're saying about putting it on the front end of the album, and the re-release strategy I think is a little bit cheesy and whatever else. But I think them showing that they can do that and how easy it is, but I think the song stands on its own. And I think it is good. And so I kind of appreciate that they were able to say, oh, you want us to do this easy thing? Yeah, sure. But we'll show you. And I think the results are great.
I think there's like a part that like is to me also though, like gives me even more admiration for this band, because I think it like shows how easily they could have just rode the new metal rap rock wave. Like they clearly had the chops to just put out that kind of stuff, and maybe it would have been popular at the time. But you know, one of the things that was interesting was when they were working on this album, both Korn and Limp Bizkit were getting ready for tours of their own and asked Deftones to play on those tours to support White Pony, and Deftones turned them down. And they specifically, and make no mistake, like I tried doing some research on this. By all accounts, the members of Deftones and Korn are still great friends to this day. There was not animus in it. It was just Chino. He had a comment where he said something like, you know, that he had a sense that this new metal thing was going to die, and he did not want to be part of that death. He wanted Deftones to stand on their own 2 feet and be their own thing. And I do think, even though I still would say Adrenaline and Around the Fur only tangentially fit into what was going on in that new metal thing, they were never a straightforward new metal band anyways. But he sort of saw this happening, and this White Pony is what really pushed them into this like art metal band that was its own thing, and it didn't need to be a part of any scene. And I think in hindsight that served them well to still be the band that they are today, you know, compared to, and I will not sit here and say anything bad about Korn, a band I really respect, but I don't listen to
but
Korn
their range
anymore.
is
They're not
limited.
relevant in the way that like Deftones, there's a lot of people from in all corners, and including even the media, like people are interested when Deftones put out a new album in a way that they aren't when it comes to a band like Korn anymore. And I do think that, you know, Deftones could have easily just gone on that ride. And I think you see that happen a lot with bands because it's the easiest path where there's this thing happening. We want to be a part of it, and you ride it to whatever outcome. And it can be hard to end up persisting through all of that. And even like, you know, a scene that was near and dear to our heart, the grunge scene, when that crashed out, you know, a lot of bands went through a lot of hard times on the flip side of that. And it was really hard to survive outside of that, like whatever that machine thing is that comes in and eats up these scenes.
And I think you're right. It was amazing that Chino and the band realized that they didn't want to be Warrant, left holding the bag when 80s glam metal, you know, disappeared and people moved on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is a band, you know, we will disproportionately talk about Chino because he's the singer and he is the most outwardly visible member of the band. He probably talks the most, but you know, when you really start White Pony, the first thing that always is apparent to me is the drumming of Abe Cunningham. You know, whether his drum part on Around the Fur is legendary, and he opens White Pony. I still don't know how to pronounce this song title.
Feta Sierra. Feiticeira. It's a
Feiticeira.
it's a Portuguese word that means sorceress. I looked it up for
It's
this
so
show.
funny though, because I've been listening to this song for a million years, and it never once occurred to me to try and pronounce the name of the song.
It's a big same.
Um, but it opens with this really complex drum beat that Abe Cunningham throws down, and it's electrifying. And
Yeah.
anybody who thinks that this is a one-man band, or that, you know, the other members of the band aren't important, has another thing coming, because, you know, without Abe Cunningham, who knows what this band would actually sound like.
Yeah, and I think Stephen Carpenter is every bit as important too. I mean, he's the one who
For
was
sure.
writing
I was
all
just
of the
starting with
music.
Abe.
He was writing all of the music on those first two albums for the most part.
Well, and on top of it, with him, you know, they didn't want to be locked in. Yes, he plays the tuned down 7-string, the really deep baritone guitar, but they never wanted to just be the riff band. And
right.
over time, they kept opening up their melodies and opening up the sound of their songs, and in ways that were less and less formulaic and more art rock.
Well, and a big part of that is another member who made his debut on this album, Frank Delgado, the DJ / sampler / whatever. You know, he was very instrumental in adding a lot of the lush sounds and textures and layers that are on this album that weren't on their previous albums. And they talked about, in one of the articles I read, they talked about how they had to give a big nod to the producer, Terry Date, that like they knew what they wanted this to sound like, but they didn't have the like experience to know how to make those sounds. So they would like describe to him what they were trying to go for, and Terry would kind of figure out how to achieve some of those sounds. But they really leveraged having Frank there to add some of those like non-traditional sounds that aren't just guitar, bass, and drums.
Which brings us to Digital Bath, which for me is the culmination of where this band was. Because when I first heard Digital Bath, I was like, oh, this is the same band that did Bored, but it's an evolved version of the band that did Bored, because you've got all the melody and the explosions, but the atmospherics that Frank Delgado brings, with whether it's samples or synths or all the above, you know, it's just a more mature, refined sound. They're not in a rush. They're really letting it breathe on their way to the chorus. But then they let Chino shine the same way they did on Bored, where his vocals are just soaring above it all. And that was, I loved Feiticeira or whatever, but when I heard Digital Bath, I knew that if they kept this up for an entire record, that this album was going to be one of my favorite things that I'd heard in a long time.
You want to know?
That's the song.
You want to know a funny story about Digital Bath? So 2000 is the height of pre-releases, MP3 downloads. And I had this album well before it actually came out. And there were these, like, we've talked about this. We did an episode where we talked about the documentary that came out about that whole like scene and how music was getting stolen and released online early. And one of the groups that did this release mixed up the track names on that pre-release, and Digital Bath was Teenager. And so to this day, when people say Digital Bath, I have to like stop myself and think about like which one Digital Bath is. Because what's funny is, like, at that time I cared a lot more about track titles than I do today too, which is like the other side effect. The side effect of like music being on Spotify or whatever streaming service is a lot of times you don't even look at song titles anymore. Like, you know them by sound, or you may know them by track number, but you don't always know the track titles if you don't pay close attention. But so anyway, so that was just kind of funny that like when you said Digital Bath, I had to remember if you were referring, I think RX Queen might have been mixed up too. Like there was like 3 or 4 songs that were all like jumbled in their song names. Which is why like this has to be the most confusing album in terms of like what the actual track list is, because you have like the main white cover that most people know, that has Back to School as the first track, but it's not supposed to be the first track. Then you have the people who had the pre-release who have like the track titles or orders all mixed up. Then you had the black and red versions, which had The Boys Republic as the last song on the album, but it was not the last song on the gray copy, which was the actual intent. Like, if you want to know what the actual album is, it's the gray cover. Like, there's no Boys Republic, there's no Back to School. It's just the 11 tracks in their proper order.
And that's the first one that I had, by the way.
Yeah,
because I bought it at a department store in upstate New York.
I really miss the Boys Republic, though. I don't have a CD player anymore. I still have my black Deftones CD, but I don't have a CD player, so I can't listen to it. And
you're not going to load it up on the PS5 or an Xbox.
Yeah, and it's not streaming. Boys Republic isn't streaming. So I actually went to YouTube today to listen to it, and man, that song is still awesome. It's such a good song.
So let's keep going track by track, because after Digital Bath, Deftones proved that they can just play out metal as well.
And they got
as
a Grammy for it. They got a Grammy
Elite.
for it. The song Elite. It's their only Grammy that they've ever won.
Which is hysterical, because it wasn't even like a big song, really, but a nominated performance.
But it was the heaviest. I don't know. Korea's pretty heavy, too.
Yeah.
I don't know. Korea or Elite, one of these are the heaviest song on the album. But like, to me, this one seemed like the proverbial, like, throwing the old fans a bone, like, hey, let's make sure we have something on here for the people that were with us through Around the Fur and Adrenaline.
But I certainly thought it was a nice counterbalance after Digital Bath, great. Too.
It's perfectly sequenced on the album, too. Like, it hits like a truck when that song comes on.
All right, RX Queen.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot probably to say about this track. Like,
I do. It's maybe one of the better. It's one of the most accessible choruses on the entire record. You're my girl, and that's all right. It's sing-alongable.
Sure.
A lot of times with Deftones, you might not know what they're singing unless you're reading the lyrics, and there's not a lot of stuff that you could just sing along with. But this was one that I could actually sing along with in my car, and I enjoyed it very much.
For sure.
But this one, it almost surprises me that it didn't become like a big alternative rock radio hit. When you hear that the label didn't think that there were any singles, it makes you wonder what I'm missing about a song like RX Queen, that they felt like it wasn't going to work at Maverick. But here I'm going, this is a pretty accessible alternative rock song.
For sure. By the way, is Maverick still around?
I have no idea. Everything's been folded into something else.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. Like, I don't actually know what label Deftones are on currently, but anyways.
Street Carp, just another straightforward Deftones song.
This one, like, it's almost got like a little bit of punk to it in a way. This one I just always really appreciated this song. I really liked it.
Yeah, me too. It's got kind of that circular guitar riff, and one of the things that I felt like they continually did as their career moved along was better and better vocal mixing, so that you could kind of hear different parts. The band was very content in being this wall of sound at certain points in their career where you had trouble making out different things. And sometimes you'd even have trouble picking out the bass from the guitars.
I don't think they were a super confident band early in their career. They were just a group of friends, a bunch of stoners that got together and like, were like, hey, let's try to make some music. Like, famously, I think, was it Stefan who got hit by a car or something and had a lawsuit and won some money, and so he just bought some gear for them so they could start playing music. So I like, this is like, I always appreciate this about this band. Like, I feel like there is a stark growth from Adrenaline through Saturday Night Wrist. And not that the albums after that are good, but like, to me, that's their like upward trajectory in like becoming more and more and more confident in their songwriting. And so I think they probably also at that point started to feel like, you know what, it's okay to let people hear Chino sing because he can actually sing. And, you know,
Yeah.
like, let's hear the different parts in these songs. We don't need to just be we don't need to just be the rhythm and the noise.
Which brings us to Teenager, which I can't tell if any of the band is actually playing on that at all, or if it's just Frank Delgado building this kind of dreamy pop song and multiple Chinos singing together. It's a total studio creation, but it's the ultimate palate cleanser, almost exactly in the middle of the record. I like this one. I would never listen to this one out of nowhere by itself, but in the middle of the record, I really enjoy it.
We're kind of getting to the part of the album, and I'll talk about this a little bit after we get through this, I suppose. But like, this is the part where like this, to me, this album gets a little nebulous, and like I personally, so like, because what's funny is like you and I have very different lasting impressions of this album. This is not one of my favorite Deftones albums.
Oh wow.
And I don't think that it has particularly aged well, which we can talk about after we get through these. But like, this like sequence here of like Street Carp, Teenager, Knife Party, Korea, to me these are all just fine Deftones songs. Like, I think any
Knife Party is one of the best Deftones songs of all time.
A lot of people do. A lot of people loved Knife Party, and I just never, I don't know, it just never resonated with me in that same way.
So I love the up-tempo dreamy guitars. I love the chorus. I love I don't know if is it the Pink Floyd song Great Gig in the Sky where the girl starts screaming. You know, they've got the screaming girl at the second half of the song. I love it. I love it all the way around. And I truly think it's one of the most range extending songs the band had done to date.
I think for me, it's mostly the vocal melody, maybe, or something. There's something about the "go get your knife" part that just feels so generic to me. But
I don't know. It's the pre-chorus too, though. I could float here forever and all that stuff.
Yeah,
it's the chorus is almost a letdown from the pre-chorus.
Yeah. Like I mean, I get it. And like, I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't love this album, because I already said I did. I listened to it a ton. It's just like, for me, when they put out their self-titled album, I personally was like, to me, that felt like almost a return to form in ways that I appreciated them doing what they did with White Pony, but it just, I don't know, like, for me, it just sort of feels so stuck in a certain time. Like, to me, it just feels like such a product of that era. Whereas I feel like the self-titled and Saturday Night Wrist kind of were the aftermath of that all collapsing and going away. And it's like, look, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying anybody who loves this album, like, I would imagine most people, if you ask them what's their favorite Deftones album, would probably say White Pony. So I'm not sitting here saying like you guys are all wrong and I'm right. It's just my opinion. For what I liked about Deftones, this one probably hasn't stuck with me in the same way.
So I think in hindsight, it maybe could feel more like a stepping stone, but I can't escape the way it felt in the moment, like another giant leap forward for a band that I was all in on and I just loved completely. Korea is a song that if you only listen to the first half, it'd be totally forgettable. But the groove that the band finds in the last third of the song is the memorable part for me. And that obviously that brings us to Passenger, which is
very memorable song.
Very memorable, but also kind of a dangerous move to bring one of the biggest metal singers of all time onto your record to sing a very important part. Maynard James Keenan from Tool sings one of his best vocal melodies, one of his best choruses in the history of his singing career on another band's record.
Yeah. I think that, like, I don't know how true this actually is, but my perception of it at the time as a 20-year-old was that, like, this was like extremely validating to Deftones that they were able to get Maynard to come and sing on this, because Maynard was not like a guy who was going around adding vocals to tons of different bands. Like,
No, he
yeah,
sang one line on Know Your Enemy,
yeah,
essentially.
yeah. He had Know Your Rage Against the Machine and Deftones are probably his two most famous ones. I mean, he's done other things since then, but um, I just remember feeling like really proud of Deftones that they got Maynard to come and sing on this. Like, I thought it was just, like I said, just extremely validating that, like, this was not, because, like, if anybody was gonna hate the formulaic, like, new metal thing, it would be Maynard. And so for him to come and sing on Deftones, it was like, yeah, see, these guys are different. They're not just a part of that scene. Like that's my lasting thing about White Pony. Like, regardless of how much I listen to it or don't listen to it today, like, to me, it's just this, like, testament of what that band was about to become. Like, for me, this is the gateway into what Deftones ultimately became. And
So
I really
the
think Maynard
story,
singing that was important.
yeah, and the story is apparently Maynard and Chino were just hanging out in the lead up to recording that record, and I'm reading from one of the articles that I pulled before we did this episode, and Chino remembers it that there was talk of Maynard being executive producer on the album.
Oh,
that never
really?
quite happened, but he was hanging around at their rehearsal space during the writing sessions, and it says he brought champagne and percussion instruments and generally hung out and weighed in with ideas and feedback.
He brought champagne and not wine?
He hadn't quite gotten to the Arizona vineyard yet,
I guess
probably.
not.
But yeah, and obviously it culminated in one of the greatest Deftones songs that, you know, and one of the greatest vocal performances that Maynard ever put out.
Yeah.
Which is, it's also interesting that one never became, it certainly got some radio airplay and it became a hit and notable in Deftones circles, but, you know, Change in the House of Flies obviously became a much, 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 much bigger hit.
Yeah, I think Passenger is, like, always been sort of a if you know kind of songs, you know. But I just remember, like, driving around, like, on those, like, cool summer nights, like, literally, like, mimicking, like, that feeling of what the song talks about, and just driving with the windows down and, like, letting that cool night air in your car. Like, it was just such a great song. But yeah, so Change, which, you know, becomes their biggest hit, is actually like sort of a point of contention within the band. We talked about this, that, like, Stefan had been, like, the primary, you know, well, he was the only guitar player on the first couple albums, primary music writer. And Chino, by this point, had started borrowing Steph's guitars and noodling with things, and he comes up with this song, Change, which everybody agrees is incredible. But there was always, like, a little bit of resentment within the band. Like, I think Steph felt a little bit like his territory was being impeded, and they've talked about this in interviews that, like, you know, they're fine with it now, but there was a little bit of butting of heads of, like, hey, why don't you stay in your lane? Like, let me handle this. And what's cool about this, though, is I think it's really important for the band that Chino became a guitar player. Like, I think you hear it on this album, like, the push and pull between the heavy and the atmospheric. It's like Chino brings a much lighter, more atmospheric sensibility to it, whereas Steph is just happy to just, you know, bang out, like, just crunching riffs all day long, and he's great at it. And you sort of, like, have this, like, really cool dynamic that develops between the two sides of this band. So it's like, it's ultimately hugely important. And, like, tension in bands is not always bad. Like, if you can control the tension, creative tension can be a good thing. And yeah, I just watched, you know, Get Ready drink for the Pearl Jam mention and gratuitous Pearl Jam mention in this episode. But I just watched Rick Beato episode. He did an interview with Mike and Jeff from Pearl Jam, and Jeff was talking about how in that like that early time, like right around when Andy Wood had died and Mother Love Bone was no longer a thing, and Stone and Mike had started playing guitar together, and Mike was like kind of trying to get Stone to bring Jeff into the band, and Stone kind of didn't want to. And Jeff talked about how he knew, he had heard through the grapevine that Mike and Stone were playing together, but Jeff was still friends with Stone. Like they would hang out and ride bike together. And Jeff would like kind of intimate like, yeah, I don't have much going on right now. Like trying to see, like there was like this, like just a little bit of that creative tension between Stone and Jeff. And Jeff talked about how when they did finally agree that they were going to start a new band, which would ultimately become Pearl Jam, they kind of laid all their cards on the table, and like Stone kind of cleared the air of the things he didn't like maybe about what Jeff was doing. And Jeff was like, hey, I need to have more of a role in the songwriting. I used to be a songwriter, but you know, in Mother Love Bone, I didn't have any space to write. I want to be able to write, which, you know, if you like the song Jeremy, it's a why go, like it's a damn good thing that they let Jeff become a songwriter, but that creative tension can lead to like new dynamics and new things. And I
when
think
we saw later that letting Chino play guitar turned out, I think that probably helped lead to Minerva and some of the stuff on the follow up to White Pony.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. And that's where I think that dynamic, that creative tension was important.
But we can't leave Change in the House of Flies yet because it's quiz time.
Okay.
Do you know what movie soundtrack Change in the House of Flies was on in the year 2000?
Fight Club?
No.
I don't know.
This is going to blow your mind.
I do remember it being in a movie, but I can't remember what it was.
Not only was it in this movie, it was featured in an MTV special with the star of this movie playing songs with a weird grab bag of 90s alternative rock metal icons. Little Nicky.
Oh,
Adam
right.
Sandler film.
That's right. Yep.
And so there was an MTV special, the Little Nicky MTV special. I remember watching this. And
that movie is better than people remember, by the way.
That's fine.
Like there's some funny things in that movie. But anyways.
But that soundtrack featured POD, Incubus, School of Hard Knocks by POD, Pardon Me by Incubus, Change in the House of Flies by Deftones, Rock Superstar by Cypress Hill. But the MTV special is members of Deftones, Incubus, POD, and Adam Sandler sitting around with acoustic guitars playing. They played super slow acoustic version of Be Quiet and Drive, even though Change in the House of Flies was the song on the record. So look up that video. It's absolutely hysterical. And not like in a, hey, this is stupid kind of way, but actually kind of in a fun way that Adam Sandler loved music enough that he was willing to prop up those bands, even when he was promoting a movie that had almost nothing to do with music like that.
And speaking of Incubus, you know, we talked about the fact that Deftones didn't tour with Korn or Limp Bizkit. When the White Pony tour, they toured with Incubus and Taproot.
That's kind of cool.
Which is actually a really cool lineup. I would like to have seen that show. I really liked Taproot a lot. They were a very like criminally overlooked band. Taproot was really good.
Their debut record was incredible.
Yeah. But I thought all three of maybe they have more. I don't know. The three albums that I listened to, I actually liked all of them. They were incredible.
I punched out after a little bit, but I enjoyed everything I ever listened to by them. I just didn't keep up.
Yeah.
So that's Change in the House of Flies, which, you know, obviously
what can you say? It's an enormous song. Everybody knows it. It's awesome. Like,
is it kind of funny to you maybe that's the one that
I think it's a great song. It's a simple song.
Well, and I love it. Don't get me wrong, but it still kind of amazes me that that's the one that they've come to be known for. You know, it's kind of like when we talked about Soundgarden and
Black Hole Sun
back in the day, and that Black Hole Sun more than Felon Black Days, more than Spoon Man, more than, you know. Sometimes it's ponderous to me, even as a giant fan, including the song that's the one. I never understood why Jeremy was the one that hit Over Alive.
Yeah.
I just,
Right.
even as a giant super fan, sometimes you're surprised by the ones that find critical mass in the culture.
Yeah. So, you just never know.
And so Pink Maggot was obviously the source material that turned into Mini Maggot back to school. And it's this spacious, beautiful, lush 7-minute, 33-second song that
Yeah.
just exits the album in the most perfect way. This might
It's like
be
the
one of
perfect,
the songs. This might be one of the songs that had me falling in love with the idea of perfect album closers.
right. Because it's got that like slow build, like the whole like first part of it is just building, 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 building. And then it just kind of like slowly wanes out. Like it's just so well executed. The restraint that they showed to let that, because again, as we saw with Back to School, like there's another way to do that song that is radically different. And I just really appreciate the restraint that they had to keep it in that same atmospheric, really like groove, that vibe that it has. It's just such a good song.
And you hear the band obviously is doing just amazing things in terms of atmospherics, but also this is one of the examples of Chino using his voice like an instrument, not as a vocalist saying words necessarily, but just using all the delay pedals and finding places in his voice that don't sound like anybody should be able to find that place in their voice, and using it in a way that is like really effective.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot with different singers that can allow their voice to be an instrument, and Chino is definitely one of them. And
For sure.
like this is a band that we have talked about quite a bit on this show. They certainly have shown so many different sides and variations of the things that they can do. They don't tend to stick in one place for too long. They're almost always pushing different envelopes and trying to do different things. And sometimes we like it more than others. But I just think this is such, despite maybe, how I do still feel like, of any Deftones album, this is the one that just to me is just so specifically year 2000. Like it's just, I can't separate it from that era of what was going on in music. And that maybe that's a me thing, that's fine. But like, having said all that, this is a career defining record. Like this is an album that I have such a deep appreciation for, because I still say like this is what really established Deftones as like, look, this is a band that it's okay to be like critically accepting of. This is not a butt rock band. This is not a, like a new metal, like rap rock, like generic ripoff thing. Like they're doing their own thing. And, this is that. I don't know if this is their only platinum album, but it was certainly their first platinum album. And they deserve all the success for it. I'm glad it's a thing. Like it was fun to listen to it quite a bit these last couple weeks preparing for this episode. So I did enjoy that. I just like, for me and my sensibilities, I liked some of the more experimental directions they went on in their like subsequent albums after this, maybe a little bit more than this. Like this one to me, it's just, this is like a teenager album. Like it's that uncomfortable transition from where they were to what they were becoming. And that's sort of my lasting feeling.
And I don't disagree with that, but I will say that it's also a transitional era for where I do think a lot of the new metal stuff had peaked and was disappearing. And I felt like this one, in 2000, that was Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park, but it was also still like The Sickness by Disturbed and Infest by Papa Roach and some of those things. And so when you get an album like this, and you get an album like Mare de Gnomes by A Perfect Circle, it feels like, okay, now I feel like what's coming versus what was. And I feel like this one gave me hope. It gave me hope that there was a future for rock, alternative rock, heavy rock that I was going to enjoy, that was less superficial than what Limp Bizkit had become. And God forbid we talk about Creed again. But you want to talk about butt rock, you got Creed. Disturbed, not an awful band, but very specific and
But
very
right,
one-dimensional, and that's where we also talk about Korn, great band, but they stay in their lane. They've been very one-dimensional, and I like them,
yeah,
and they're very good at what they do, but they're never going to define the next era of culture. They're always going to harken back to what they were, and people love them for harkening back to what they were. Deftones are a band that continues to evolve and bring maybe it used to be a smaller and smaller audience along with them. But I
yeah.
think they've finally reached that maturation point where new and old fans are finding them, and I can't wait to see them in a basketball arena in the fall.
Yeah. I still think too, I can't say this for certainty, like because I don't know enough about Incubus to know like where they were at in the songwriting process of Morning View. But like, I don't think it's a huge stretch to say like they might have taken some inspiration for the way they stretched their legs on Morning View, like as taking inspiration for what Deftones did with White Pony. We talked about the fact that they toured together. I don't think it would be that crazy of an assumption to think that maybe there was some influence there, which I certainly have an appreciation for that as well. Like, because that, to your point, like that's sort of where that delineation was starting to happen between a scene that was maybe on the downslope and on its way out, and the survivors of that scene were the bands that were capable of moving in different directions and continuing, but still staying true. Like Morning View still absolutely sounds like Incubus. It was just a very different Incubus album. And White Pony still absolutely sounds like Deftones. It's just, it was a different Deftones from what they were before.
Well, and not only are Deftones and A Perfect Circle and some of those bands kind of pushing the culture in a different direction. The year 2000 is when Drive came out, and so all of a sudden Incubus is being solidified in who they are with a song like Drive, which also gives them all the kudos that they need to keep going in that direction and expanding their sound away from Pardon Me and away from I can't remember the name of the record that preceded that, but was it? Science.
Science. Yeah.
Um,
all I was seeing was the green.
Yeah.
I was like, I was a
completely different band by the time they make Morning View from what they were when they made Science in the best possible way.
Absolutely. I mean, I still love Science, but it was
sure.
It's great to see Incubus, like I said, color outside the lines a little bit, and that's ultimately what this album represents to me, is just bands figuring this out, like how to start to move outside those lines. And like, I think Deftones is one of the most unlikely bands to become what they are today. Like, I don't think you would have seen this coming in the days of Adrenaline and Around the Fur, which, yeah, you and I both adore those albums, but like, it's hard to imagine in that time just the sound, even just the look of the band, like you just didn't see them becoming what they would become, and it's pretty cool to see.
Well, and that's part of the story too, is because when Adrenaline comes out, you and I are around 16, and when Around the Fur comes out, we're around 17 or 18, and then all of a sudden, this band is growing up just like we're growing up. And there are only a few bands that you get to take that ride with, and Deftones is one of those bands that we got to take that ride with. But we are over an hour. This, as we always do when we bring up a band like Deftones, it's very easy for us to. I was going to say stretch, but we weren't stretching. That was all. That was all just really fun.
It felt fast, but I think we covered everything. I don't think there was anything in my notes here that I wanted to touch on that we didn't. So
no. So we thank you so much for listening. Hope we brought a little bit of memory lane back to your lives with White Pony, and maybe you'll listen to it for the next week like we have been doing the prior 2 weeks. That's the most fun thing about this, is knowing we're going to talk about the 25th anniversary. And then I probably listened to this album 7 or 8 times over the last week, to really refamiliarize myself with everything. And so it's a lot of fun, and I hope you guys are having fun too. We will talk to you next time. It's been the Album of Record podcast.